The atmosphere of the court was as calm as usual when suddenly the door opened loudly and Emily Parker entered the hall like a storm. She had papers in her hand, lines of anger and emotion on her face, and her manner was as if the greatest injustice in the world had happened to her. The audience looked on in shock, as if a movie scene had actually come to life. Emily went straight to the judge, laid down her file, and loudly announced that she was suing her husband, Michael Parker. The accusation? He had refused to go shopping with her. Some women in the audience held their heads in surprise, and Linda Brooks, her neighbor in the back seat, tried to hide a chuckle. But this was no ordinary thing for Emily. He said in a trembling voice and dramatic tone, "He didn't even go shoe shopping with me. Think of it, shoes! What greater example of crushing a wife's dreams could there be?" Some in the hall bit their lips to suppress laughter, but Judge Robert Thompson silenced the courtroom with his dry but serious tone. But the question was, why was Emily fighting this case so fiercely? Was this matter limited to just the purchase, or was there another bitter truth hidden behind it? This mystery left a heavy silence in the courtroom. There was a moment of silence in the courtroom after Emily's dramatic announcement. All eyes turned to Judge Robert Thompson, who was looking at Emily over his glasses with a mixture of surprise and a smile. There was a dry humor on his face, as if he was secretly thinking that while the court heard cases of major crimes, today the case before him was about a husband not going shopping. He tried to control the atmosphere with a light cough and said, "This is a courthouse, not a department store." But the sarcasm and slight humor in his tone made the courtroom atmosphere more interesting. Michael Parker, the defendant, sat in his seat, listening to everything. His face was marked by confusion, but at the same time he was displaying an unusual calm. It was as if he knew that all this was being exaggerated. Yet there was a quiet weariness in his eyes that suggested that perhaps there was more to the matter than just the purchase. Emily's lawyer, Sarah Collins, suppressed a smile as she filed her papers. She knew the case was ridiculous, but she had the art of making it seem serious in Emily's favor. Michael's lawyer, David Reed, smiled faintly, as if he thought the case was more like a theater stage than a courtroom. The women in the audience were elbowing each other and whispering, and some of the men were pressing their lips together to hide their smiles. But there was one impression hidden in the whole scene that could not be hidden from everyone's eyes. Emily's intensity and Michael's silence were not simply evidence of a shopping problem. They were indicating that there was a deep rift in their relationship, which was now about to be revealed in the courtroom. Emily and Michael's story was not an ordinary couple story. The two met a few years ago in a small bookstore. Emily was the owner of colorful clothes and a loud laugh, while Michael was a quiet and serious young man whose greatest joy was a good book and a cup of coffee. This contrast in their temperaments surprised everyone at first, but the truth was that this difference drew them to each other. After marriage, this contradiction became even more pronounced in their daily lives. Emily loved to go shopping, buy new things, and have parties with friends. She would go out in bright colors at every opportunity, and she wanted Michael to be with her everywhere. On the other hand, for Michael, shopping was a waste of time. He believed that keeping life simple was the key to happiness. When Emily dreamed of a new pair of shoes or clothes, Michael would talk about budgets and practical needs. Emily would often tell friends that going shopping with Michael is like making a child read a math book. Everyone would laugh at that, but Michael would sometimes smile at her playful nature and say, "Emily's choice is the most expensive in the world, and my purse is the smallest in the world." These little things might seem funny to others, but over time, a longing began to grow in Emily's heart. She wanted Michael to not only go to the market with her, but also to understand her feelings, to share in her joys. Michael, in his seriousness, kept thinking that he had given Emily peace and security, but in Emily's heart, there was a desire for him to be a part of her laughter, her dreams, and her little desires. On the one hand, they continued to spend time joking around, but deep down, this difference began to form a rift. This rift later reached the courthouse. One evening, Emily, in her usual cheerful mood, came to Michael and said that she needed new clothes and shoes. She asked Michael in a hopeful tone to go to the market with her. But Michael, in a tired manner, putting his bag aside, replied that the office work was too much. He was very tired and did not dare to go out. The smile on Emily's face immediately faded. For her, it was not just a rejection, but once again a feeling of being ignored. For Michael, it was just a matter of exhaustion, but in Emily's heart, it was a wound that was deepening with time. She remained silent for a while, holding back her tears, and then left the room in an angry manner. All this was not hidden from the eyes of her neighbor, Linda Brooks. Linda was peering out the window and hearing Emily's loud voice, immediately began to draw conclusions according to her old habit. She kept saying under her breath that this Parker couple's story is nothing less than a drama. The next moment she picked up the phone and began to explain the details to another neighbor. The word spread throughout the neighborhood with humor and curiosity that Emily's husband did not even go shopping with her. But the truth was that Emily did not take the matter so lightly. She kept a small diary in her bedroom drawer, in which she wrote down the dates of each time Michael refused to go with her. Within a few weeks, the diary had filled several pages. To her, this was not just an excuse to avoid shopping, but a constant apathy and lack of attention that was starting to break her inside. This hidden diary was to become Emily's strongest evidence in court in the coming days. The atmosphere in the house was unusually tense that day. Michael was sitting on the couch trying to read the newspaper while Emily was pacing around the room. The sound of her footsteps was so loud that Michael's peace was disappearing more and more. Emily complained loudly about how long he could continue to ignore his wife. She said that every time she asked to go out with him, Michael would either have an excuse about work or exhaustion, as if her happiness didn't matter. Her voice was filled with both resentment and sarcasm. Michael took a deep breath and tried to explain gently that shopping was not a matter of life and death. He said that he was doing his duty, taking care of the household expenses, and that was his responsibility. But to Emily, this answer was unacceptable. She said emotionally that sharing in a wife's joys was also a responsibility, and perhaps Michael had never tried to understand this seriously. The conversation turned into a mockery and anger as it progressed. Emily laughed and said bitterly, "Maybe if a new bookstore opens, Michael will run to go there, but the market with his wife? That's punishment for him." This sentence caused a moment of humor in the atmosphere, but immediately moisture rose in Emily's eyes. Michael fell silent at the sight of her tears. The confusion on his face was obvious, as if he couldn't understand why a small matter had become so big. But in fact, this was not just a story of denial. Emily's tone and complaints reflected the bitterness that comes from years of ignored desires and unfulfilled emotions. The room fell silent, but behind that silence lay a heavy question. Is this matter limited to shopping, or has Michael truly left his wife emotionally alone? The loud noise of Emily and Michael's voices gradually began to be heard throughout the neighborhood. The windows of their house were closed, but the impression of a heated argument still reached outside. Neighbor Linda Brooks, who already took an unnecessary interest in everything that the Parkers and their spouses did, peered out the window and began to assess the situation. She heard a few sentences and immediately concluded that this was not just a matter of shopping, but a serious domestic dispute. Linda, in a mixture of panic and excitement, immediately called the police. She not only exaggerated the noise, but also said that she feared that the matter might take a dangerous turn. The other women in the neighborhood also got wind of the news, and they all began to peer out of their windows and doors, preparing to watch the spectacle. In a short while, a police car with its lights on pulled into the street. The officers entered with a loud bang on the door. The couple, who had been sitting quietly after the argument, were suddenly startled. Michael stood up in surprise, while more tears welled up in Emily's eyes. The police, without looking at the situation, began to question in a harsh tone. They felt as if this was a real case of domestic violence. Michael tried to explain that it was just a discussion about shopping, but no one took his words seriously. Emily's moist eyes and trembling voice made the atmosphere even more serious. The officers looked at each other meaningfully and thought that these tears in the wife's eyes must be a sign of some serious abuse. This moment was very painful for Michael. He felt innocent and misunderstood. He knew that he had never raised a hand against Emily, but at that moment the whole situation was going against him. On the other hand, Emily felt that once again no one had really listened to her. She wanted her feelings to be understood, but now everything had turned into a spectacle. Meanwhile, Linda and the other neighboring women, peering out of the windows, were making the scene even more comical with suppressed laughter. Some found it interesting, some embarrassing. But the real truth was that a simple argument not only created a further rift in the relationship between husband and wife, but also deepened in Michael's heart the feeling that the world was misunderstanding him, while in Emily's heart, the bitterness grew stronger that no one had ever given importance to her feelings. This moment caused the distance between the two to widen further, and this distance would soon reach the courtroom. The formal proceedings began in the courtroom. Judge Robert Thompson straightened his chair and allowed the lawyers for the parties to make opening statements. First to stand was Sarah Collins, the lawyer for the plaintiff, Emily. Her manner was a combination of confidence and gentleness. She said in a very serious tone that this case was not just about shopping, but about the appreciation of feelings. She explained that for years, Emily had longed to spend time with her husband and share his joys with him. But the repeated refusals had broken her emotionally. Sarah used very effective words to captivate the audience. She said that a relationship is not only about responsibilities, but also about the involvement of emotions. When a wife wants to share her husband's joys and the husband repeatedly turns his back, this behavior is no less painful than a physical wound. Emily's moist eyes in the courtroom made Sarah's words even more weighty. Now it was the turn of David Reed, the lawyer for the defendant Michael. He put the papers aside and said with a smile that apparently this case was about a husband not going shopping, which sounds like the most unique case in the world. There was a muffled laugh in the courtroom at this sentence, but then he took a serious tone and explained that Michael was a responsible husband who worked hard day and night to run the household. His refusal was never due to love for his wife, but rather due to his physical exhaustion and practical needs. David added that every relationship goes through disagreements and misunderstandings. If a husband is tired and wants to rest, is that a crime? Addressing the judge, he said that the court has to look at the emotional claims as well as the reality. Sarah looked at David's words with a slight smile, as if to say that this lawyer was also trying to hide the truth in a humorous guise. At this point, the light-hearted banter of the two lawyers made the atmosphere interesting, but Emily's tears and Michael's silence in the background were giving the story a more serious tone. After the opening statements, it was time to present witnesses in court. The first to be called was Linda Brooks, the neighbor who had a habit of taking an inordinate interest in other people's affairs. Linda entered the courtroom with an expression on her face as if she had been waiting for this moment for years. She took the oath and then began her statement in dramatic style. Linda claimed that she had heard Emily and Michael arguing from her window several times. She exaggerated that the noises were so loud that even her dog had not slept peacefully for several nights. It was difficult to suppress laughter on the lips of those sitting in court. Then she also said that she often felt that the next moment would turn into a major accident, although in reality, she knew that this case simply revolved around denial and stubbornness. Linda's statement made Judge Robert Thompson smile. He looked over his glasses and said, "This is a courtroom, not a gossip forum." But Linda's exaggerated statement certainly added a humorous touch to the proceedings. Now it was the turn of Emily's close friend, Rachel Turner. Rachel's style was completely different from Linda's. She said with great seriousness and gentleness that Emily was a sensitive woman for whom small things in a relationship were of great importance. She said that Emily had complained to her many times that Michael had dismissed her wishes as unnecessary. Rachel's voice was full of pain and sympathy, which made the courtroom atmosphere momentarily emotional. Rachel added that the most painful feeling for a wife is that her partner does not value her dreams and happiness. Hearing this, tears welled up in Emily's eyes, and there was a moment of solemn silence in the courtroom. Then Michael's close friend Tom Harris came to testify. He lightened the atmosphere as soon as he started speaking. He said that if Michael avoids shopping, it is nothing new, because he himself has been shy about going to the mall with him many times. At this, a wave of suppressed laughter broke out in the court. Tom explained that Michael is not a bad husband, but a man who takes his responsibilities seriously. He said that Michael sometimes gets so caught up in practical thinking that he doesn't understand Emily's small wishes. But this neglect is not malicious, but part of his temperament. Thus, 3 different witnesses presented the same case from 3 different angles. Linda's exaggeration created laughter, Rachel's statement touched the heart, and Tom's words lightened the atmosphere and created a soft spot for Michael. But among all of them, one thing became clear. Despite the seemingly trivial nature of this case, it was much heavier than the burden of emotions, misunderstandings, and relationships. After the witnesses' statements, the lawyers began the stage of presenting evidence. There was a slight rustling in the courtroom as everyone wanted to know what evidence might finally come to light in this unique case. At that moment, Emily's lawyer, Sarah Collins, placed a small but heavy diary on the table and announced that it was Emily's shopping refusal journal. The courtroom fell silent as the diary opened. Each page had a date and a brief note on the day Emily had asked Michael to go shopping with her and the reason he had refused. Somewhere it was written, "Too much office work," somewhere, "Headache," and somewhere, "Needs rest." These were not just sentences, but years of accumulated pain that Emily had captured in words with her own hands. Sarah read a few pages aloud to the judge. The hopelessness and loneliness hidden in those words touched the hearts of the audience. The tears flowing from Emily's eyes turned the diary into even more powerful evidence. It might have seemed comical that a lawsuit was filed for not making a purchase, but these pages were convincing everyone that the real issue was not just a purchase, but emotional neglect. Now it was Michael's turn, David Reed, to defend him. He said with great confidence that Emily's diary showed one side, but not the whole picture. He presented the court with receipts and old photos that Michael had used in his own efforts to please his wife. Sometimes he would come home unexpectedly with flowers, sometimes he would throw a small surprise dinner for Emily on her birthday, and sometimes he would take care of the housework himself to create moments of relaxation for her. Seeing this evidence created a new impression in the courtroom. The audience felt that there was another side to the story. While Emily was expressing her grief over her lack of feelings, Michael had been expressing his love in his own way, but perhaps not in the way Emily needed. A strange balance was established in the atmosphere. On one side was Emily's diary, making her suffering a living testament, and on the other were Michael's efforts to show that he was not an inattentive husband, but a different kind of partner. At this point, questions began to arise in the minds of the spectators. Was it all a big misunderstanding? Was it just a difference in the style of love between the two that gave rise to years of bitterness? Or was this really a case of a wife being constantly neglected? The truth is that on that day in court, for the first time, everyone realized that this case was not a laughing matter, but a deeply human story, where misunderstandings and silences weaken a loving relationship the most. After the witnesses and evidence, a quiet tension spread in the courtroom. The question echoed in everyone's hearts as to what was the real reason for this unique case. Judge Robert Thompson decided to hear both sides directly. All eyes were focused on Emily. Emily began her speech in a trembling voice. She said that this was not just a matter of shopping or going to the market. The real problem was that she had been seeking her husband's attention and companionship for years, but each time her desire was dismissed as unnecessary or trivial. She admitted that she cried many times in solitude and often questioned how important she was to her husband. Emily said that under the pretext of going to the market, she actually wanted to spend time with her husband so that the intimacy between the two could increase. But even this small desire was rejected every time. The breakdown in her tone was evident. She said that her goal was not to win or lose this case, but to bring the state of her heart to everyone, to prove that neglect is no less than a wound. Many people in the courtroom were moved to tears by Emily's tears. All eyes were on Michael now. He sat silent for a few moments as if words were failing him. Finally, he took a deep breath and began to speak. He admitted that Emily's words were not without foundation. He admitted that he had neglected his wife many times, but that did not mean that he did not love her. The truth was that he had been burdened by the pressures of his work and the burden of his financial responsibilities for years. Michael said that the hustle and bustle of his office had left him so exhausted that he wanted peace and quiet when he got home. He wanted to keep his problems to himself so that she wouldn't worry. But this silence proved to be poison to their relationship. He said that he always felt guilty that he wasn't able to give Emily the time and happiness she deserved. The atmosphere in the courtroom changed completely upon hearing these words. Emily's face showed a mixture of surprise and pain. She was shocked to realize that Michael's silence was not indifference, but a wall of pressure and a sense of responsibility. At this point, the judge looked at the two of them closely, and the courtroom momentarily felt like a private room where two spouses were confessing their deepest weaknesses. For the audience, the scene was nothing short of a dramatic twist. On the one hand, the wife's years of grief were revealed, and on the other, the husband's hidden pain and guilt touched everyone's hearts. This moment was showing the basis of the case from a completely new perspective. It was no longer a story of shopping or ordering shoes, but the story of two hearts that took years to understand each other's language. The tension in the courtroom was so intense that everyone seemed to hold their breath. This was the moment when the court became not a formal institution, but a mirror, in which everyone saw that the real hostility of relationships is not carelessness or stubbornness, but the silences that stand as walls between hearts for years. There was a heavy silence in the courtroom after Emily and Michael's emotional truths were revealed. All eyes were now focused on Judge Robert Thompson. He leaned back in his chair, looked at both parties carefully, and after a moment of silence, he began to speak. His voice was both dignified and gentle. The judge first addressed Emily and said that he believed that the excuse of shopping was not the real issue, but rather years of pain and need for attention were hidden behind it. Then, smiling, he said sarcastically that perhaps the most powerful thing in the world is the shoes that were knocked on the courthouse doors when they were not bought. The audience laughed, but this laughter turned serious a moment later as the judge immediately asked if this same matter had been resolved through timely negotiations. Would there have been a need for a courtroom here? Then he turned to Michael. He asked very seriously, does he know that love is not just about responsibilities, but also about the right to time and attention? Michael lowered his eyes. The judge added that no matter how much a husband carries a financial burden, if his wife feels lonely, that burden creates a rift in the relationship. Now the judge explained the legal aspect. He said that in domestic cases, the court always looks at the nature of the actual dispute. If it is about physical or financial damage, punishment and compensation are awarded. But if the matter is about emotional aspects, as in this case, then the court's job is to hold a mirror up to both parties and pave the way for reconciliation. He said that the law cannot solve everything. Some wounds can only be healed through dialogue and understanding within the hearts. Then he made a light joke. He said that if every husband was dragged to court for refusing to buy, there would be miles-long queues outside the courts. Another wave of laughter broke out at this. But there was that deep seriousness in the judge's eyes that made everyone realize that this was not just a joke, but an important life lesson. He told Emily that she had shown courage in expressing her feelings and that a woman had the right to express her feelings without repressing them. But he also convinced her that instead of relying solely on the court, husbands and wives should talk openly to each other. Then, addressing Michael, he told him not to consider his silences as strength. These silences were weakening his relationship. The greatest gift in love is time, and nothing in the world can make up for the time that never comes back. The atmosphere was getting darker by the minute. The judge's words were becoming the rules of life, not just for Michael and Emily, but for everyone in the courtroom. Everyone was realizing that this case was not just a couple's problem, but a mirror that also showed the silences hidden in our own homes. But at the same time, a conflict persisted. Is the judge going to make a final decision now, or will he persuade the two to reconcile? The hearts of the audience began to beat faster. There was a lesson in every sentence of the judge and a hint that the decision was imminent, but what would that decision be? This curiosity was making the courtroom even more thrilling. The atmosphere in the courtroom was tense. Emily and Michael had shared years of pain, loneliness, and unspoken stories about each other. But Judge Robert Thompson knew the real test was yet to come. He gave both sides one last chance to speak directly. It was a moment when deep wounds were about to be exposed. Emily spoke first. Her voice was deep but powerful. She said she never imagined that after years of marriage, she would be standing up to her husband in court. She explained that this was not about shoes or shopping. She just wanted her husband to spend time with her, understand her feelings, and make her feel important to him. She said she often felt like an old book, sitting on a shelf, but never bothered to turn the pages. Hearing these words, Michael's face showed signs of pain. He paused, took a deep breath, and then spoke. He admitted that Emily was right. He admitted that he had neglected his wife, but it wasn't because he didn't love her. Rather, his life revolved so badly around the pressures of work and responsibilities that he forgot to speak his mind. Michael said that sometimes he felt that if he revealed his problems to Emily, she would become even more upset, so he kept everything to himself. But his silence became the biggest enemy of their relationship. A deep silence fell over the courtroom. The judge nodded as if he had already reached that conclusion. Then tears began to well up in Emily's eyes. She said she wanted to share her husband's problems, to be his companion, but he kept her out. She said sadly that she had made gestures many times to express her loneliness, but Michael had never paid attention. The courtroom began to feel more personal after hearing this conversation. This was no longer a trial but a reckoning of the soul of a relationship. At this point, an interesting moment occurred. The judge said lightly that this was probably the first case in the world in which shopping was presented as primary evidence. This caused a wave of laughter among the audience. Even Emily's lips had a faint smile, and Michael also suppressed a slight chuckle. This brief moment lightened the heavy atmosphere a little. But soon another truth shocked everyone. Michael admitted that he had deliberately avoided shopping several times because every time he went to the market, it was a reminder of the feeling that he was not able to make time for his wife. This confession was even more painful for Emily. She said that she now understood that the problem was not her desire, but Michael's inevitability. Now a strange balance had been established in the courtroom. On one side, the husband expressed his compulsion and guilt, and on the other, the wife expressed her loneliness and sorrow. The words of both made it clear that the problem was not one of stubbornness or ego, but of silences and misunderstandings. But the real question was, what would the judge decide after all this? Would they separate the two, saying that the relationship had lost its foundation, or would they rule that they should both get another chance? The courtroom was silent. Every eye was on the judge. The verdict was imminent, but its direction was still a mystery. This was the moment where the story came to a cliffhanger, and the question was echoing in everyone's hearts. Will this couple fall apart, or make a new beginning? The courtroom was silent. The raw conversations between Emily and Michael had made everyone think. The witness statements, the emotional revelations, and the hidden wounds had taken this case far beyond a simple domestic dispute. All eyes were now on Judge Robert Thompson. He sat straight in his chair, his face a mixture of seriousness and gentleness. The judge adjusted his glasses slightly and looked at both parties carefully. His gaze was not harsh, but rather like a father trying to resolve a major misunderstanding between his children. There was a strange silence in the courtroom, as if the weight of each word was falling on everyone's hearts. He began by saying that marital relationships are not just legal agreements. They are a relationship of hearts and feelings where responsibility is also involved along with love. He clarified that it is not enough for a husband to simply provide for his wife, nor is it enough for a wife to simply wait for her. Marriage is a journey in which both have to walk together step by step. These words brought a slight tremor to Emily's face. There was a moisture in her eyes, as if she had been waiting to hear these words for years. Michael also bowed his head and clasped his hands tightly, as if he wanted to break the hesitation inside him. Judge Thompson fell silent in the courtroom for a moment, then said softly that in most domestic cases, the real issue is not shoes, clothes, or money. The real issue is the silences that form walls between hearts. He said that the court does not make decisions in such cases solely on paper, but also looks at human relationships and their impact. The audience's eyes grew deeper. Some faces showed sadness, others surprised, because this case was reminding them all of their own lives. The judge then turned his conversation more personal and instructive. He said that this case is an example of how small oversights can turn into big wounds. One stubborn refusal to take turns turned into years of bitterness. One unspoken word eroded trust. If they had talked in time, if they had listened to each other, perhaps this day would not have come. There was a hint of sarcasm in his words. He said he was still surprised that he had a case before him that was based on a purchase, but in reality, it was a case about a lack of love and attention. The sentence brought a faint smile to the courtroom, but also a quiet realization that reality was bitter. Now the atmosphere was so serious and burdensome that everyone was convinced that the verdict was imminent. Emily's eyes were fixed on the judge, as if she was looking for the answer to every question about her future in his words. Michael's face also had a strange calm and anxiety at the same time. Perhaps he wanted someone to punish him so that his burden would be lightened, and perhaps he also wanted him to get another chance so that he could make everything right. Judge Thompson took some notes on paper, then put his pen aside. He said that it was time for the court to rule on the case. There was a deep seriousness in his tone. Everyone in the courtroom held their breath. The moment was heavy on everyone. And then the judge's final words were to herald a new chapter. Everyone's hearts began to race. Would this decision be a declaration of separation or the light of a new beginning? The clock in the courtroom seemed to have stopped. Everyone's eyes were fixed on Judge Robert Thompson. Both Emily and Michael's faces showed a mixture of fear and hope. The judge took one last look at the paper, then took a deep breath and began to pronounce the verdict in his characteristic, soft but powerful voice. He said that this court understands that this case is not about any financial loss or legal violation, but about a relationship in which lack of communication and attention has caused a mountain to rise. Therefore, the court has come to the conclusion that punishment or fine will not solve the problem here. The real solution is for both to listen to each other and make a new start in their lives. They ordered that for the next 3 months, Emily and Michael must go out together 1 day a week. Whether it's shopping, a walk in the park, or just having a coffee. This time will be for both of them to give only to each other. Furthermore, both of them were ordered to keep a joint diary in which they would record their joys and complaints so that they could understand each other's feelings. The courtroom was filled with a surprising reaction as the verdict was heard. Some people smiled as if the judge had turned this domestic dispute into a date night. The lawyers couldn't hide their smiles either. Emily's face was both surprised and slightly smiling, as if she was thinking that her stubbornness had finally been tempered by a pleasant condition. Michael bowed his head and took a deep breath. Then a sense of relief came into his eyes, as if a burden had been lifted from his heart. Judge Thompson said in a slightly sarcastic but humorous manner that if Emily doesn't get her shoes in the future, or Michael doesn't get peace, he can come back to court, but hopefully, the next time the case will not be about shopping, but about happiness. Upon hearing this sentence, a wave of light laughter broke out in the courtroom, and the seriousness of the atmosphere momentarily diminished. At the end of the verdict, the judge reminded both of them that the court cannot save the relationship. It can only give it a chance. The real test will be outside the courtroom. That was the moment when Emily looked at Michael with moist eyes, and for the first time a soft smile appeared on her face. After hearing the court's verdict, the courtroom slowly began to empty. But Emily and Michael sat in their seats silently for a few moments. A strange softness and peace had arisen in both of their hearts. The judge's words were echoing in their minds, as if someone had shown them a mirror. There was moisture in Emily's eyes, but that moisture was not from pain, but from the feeling that after years someone had recognized the true state of her heart. She looked slowly at Michael, and for the first time, her silence seemed to reflect love rather than complaint. Michael also took a deep breath and confessed to himself that in his exhaustion and the burden of his responsibilities, he had forgotten Emily's small joys. As she was leaving, Emily told Michael with a slight smile that the court had ordered it, so now they were ready to go shopping. Michael shook his head and smiled, and replied that if he didn't have to call the court for every pair of shoes, he could go every day. Hearing this, Emily's lips broke into a genuine smile for the first time, and that moment removed the awkwardness that had been building between them. Returning home, they both decided that they would view the judge's order as an opportunity, not a burden. Emily said that her real desire was not just shoes or clothes, but to spend time with Michael. Michael sincerely admitted that he had forgotten to give his wife time and attention, and now he would make up for that lack. After that day, the two decided to rekindle their relationship. They bought their first joint diary, on the first page of which Michael wrote, "This case began in court, but the verdict is completed in our hearts." Emily also wrote, "Love does not require gifts, but understanding each other." The main lesson of the story was that small fights are not the real problem. The real problem is that we forget to listen and understand each other. Empathy and communication are the keys that open the closed doors of a relationship. Finally, there was a slight hint of humor. The following week, Michael and Emily were seen at a shopping mall, where Michael jokingly told his wife that he had come to fulfill a court order. Emily laughed and said that if this was the court's decision, she was ready to file a lawsuit every day. The two laughed, and the audience realized that sometimes the biggest decisions are not made in court, but in the heart. This unique case, which began with a shoe and a shopping dispute, actually highlighted the deeper reality of relationships. Emily's pain was not just about not being able to go to the market, but the feeling that she was not being heard. Michael's silence was not just a denial, but a reflection of exhaustion and the burden of responsibilities. The story of both teaches us that small arguments often reveal large emotional gaps, and if they are not addressed in time, they create distances in relationships. The real secret is that love is not just hidden in negotiations or gifts, but in listening, understanding, and giving each other feelings. A little empathy and a little time can not only solve big problems, but also make relationships stronger. And yes, sometimes humor also turns problems into closeness, not burdens. After all, relationships are built and live not in courts, but in hearts. If you like this story, subscribe to the channel, like and share the video so that this message can reach as many people as possible.